The day started like any other normal day would. I made my way to work at around 10 a.m. to open my shop. I run an electronics repair store with a friend of mine. We aren't particularly busy, but it pays the bills. And next month, everyone's going to be upgrading their phones. It's going to be a busy month, and hopefully, it'll make up for how slow September's been. So I opened my store like any other day. My buddy wouldn't be coming in until around 3 p.m. I open, he closes. He has chemo in the morning most days, so he can't really make it any earlier. It's really such a terrible shame. He's only 26. But I guess some people just get unlucky. The forecast called for rain today, and I could tell it would be on its way any minute now. The front of my store is covered in large panes of glass, so you could see most of the parking lot. It's quite peaceful when it storms, even if it tends to kill business for the day. You can usually hear the rain's gentle pitter-patter against the window. Usually. Until one day. Today. My buddy, let's call him John, came in at around 2:55 that day. Right before the big storm, I smiled at him as he walked in and made his way to the back of the store to put his uniform on. I got lost in thought for a few minutes, watching YouTube videos on the newest and greatest technological advancements this year, otherwise known as a huge pain in the ass for us, as companies continue to make their devices more complicated, which also translates to more difficult and expensive to repair. When suddenly I felt a hand rest on my shoulder. I looked and smiled at John. "Hey bud, what's wrong?" I stopped mid-sentence. I will always remember that face. His eyes were wide, and his mouth gaped open slightly. I followed his gaze to the front of the store. It was raining outside. Not just raining, but absolutely pouring. I could barely see past my front windows, but that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was, it was completely silent. I know in some buildings you might not hear the rain. Not this one. This was a little run-down shop that was part of a larger plaza of stores. Once we had a busted gutter that poured water right in front of the store next door when it rained, and that wasn't fixed for a whole month. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, the walls and windows are thin. You can hear the rain. But not this time. This time it was completely silent. I stopped and stared as well for what felt like minutes, before looking back at my coworker. He was making his way to the door. I made an offhand joke about him letting all the AC out again as he made his way to the front of the store. But in reality, I was scared. Something deep inside of me was screaming that this was wrong. It's that part of your mind that is responsible for your animal-like instincts. The ones that kept you alive 100,000 years ago. I told him to stop again. This time, there wasn't even a hint of sarcasm behind my voice. But why is it? I don't know. I stated in such a nervous tone that I even surprised myself somewhat. But you need to come back here. Don't open that door, I finished. He scuffed at me, like I was his mom telling him that he was grounded. Like I was his mom telling him he was grounded. And to be fair, it did sound strange. He's a grown-ass man and I'm telling him he can't open a door? It was bizarre, but at the moment, many things weren't normal. I made my way around the counter and started making my way to the front of the store. I had to stop him. Everything in me told me I had to stop him. But it was too late. He pushed that door wide open, and what we saw shocked us both. I stopped in my tracks about halfway through our lobby. It was sunny. It was a bright and beautiful day outside. I could feel the warmth come in the moment he opened the door. It looked like any other summer afternoon. No rain, no craziness, just another cozy day. Until I looked back at the windows and realized something. It was still raining. I looked from the windows to the door, then back again. How many times, I do not know. All I knew was, it was pouring rain silently against the windows, but looking through the door, you wouldn't know it. I heard my coworker mutter, "It's you. It's really you," as I watched him take a step outside. I rushed to the front of the store and made a grab for the door, but it was too late. It closed behind him. When I opened it back up, he was gone. The sunny day was gone, and for the first time, I could hear the rain. I shut the door and opened it several more times. I wanted to get him back. I wanted to figure out what the hell was going on, but it was no use. All I did was soak the rug under me as I let the rain pour in. Finally, I closed the door completely and took another look out the windows. Normally, rain would sound calm to me. Not anymore. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? What would I even begin to say? Nobody would believe me. Nobody would believe that my friend, the person who I opened this store with over 2 years ago, vanished into another dimension. Months had passed, and after that day, we went through the longest dry spell I've seen in a while. No rain, until one day. I was posting a help wanted ad on Craigslist. As morbid as that sounds, I needed help. I can't work 80-hour weeks anymore. It was really taking a toll on me and my family. But now I'd basically convinced myself that John just up and quit, that my memories were going, and that everything I saw that day was just a part of my imagination. And for the longest time, that kept me sane, until the silent rain returned. Unlike last time, this rain was completely unexpected. The forecast showed a cold and dry afternoon, but that wasn't what I saw when I was grabbing my "Be Back in 5" sign and getting ready to pick up lunch from across the street. Just like last time, the windows were almost completely covered in pouring rain. I didn't hear it, of course, but I couldn't help but peer into it. That's when I saw him. John, looking back at me. At least I think it was John. He had the same bald head and oversized boots that John wore. It was hard to tell as he was being pelted by the storm. He looked at me, and somehow I knew he was smiling. He beckoned for me to join him, for me to open the door and see the beautiful world that snatched him away just a short time ago. I turned around, walked right back into my storage room and sat there, covering my face for what felt like hours. When I walked back out, the rain had stopped. It wasn't even wet outside. Somehow I knew it wouldn't be. I sold that store less than a month later and took up managing a different business in a completely different state. Since then, the silent rain hasn't returned, and I pray it never does. Because next time, I don't know if I can resist. I sometimes ponder what I saw outside that door. I remember a beautiful sunny afternoon, but that could have just been my take on it. Sometimes I wonder what it's like, or why John wanted me to join him. It may sound crazy, but I actually have a theory as to what was behind that door. What caused the rain to pour so silently. I think what I saw was heaven. So you know the acrobat and the flea, right? I nodded as my brother, standing in the living room, delivered me his presentation. He was 16 and one of the smartest people I've ever met. That being said, he was also reckless, and sometimes his curiosity and crazy theories got the best of him. Imagine a tightrope, he said, stretching a piece of thread between his hands as a visual aid. The acrobat, he continued, can only move in 2 directions, back and forth. I nodded again, starting to wonder what he was getting at. The flea, however, has 2 additional directions: forward, back, left, and right. This is seen as a metaphor, an aid for our understanding per se, for just how much we cannot get to yet. We are the acrobat in this plane of reality. I nodded along again. But that's exactly what my question is. What if we had the ability to move like the flea? I shook my head. Damien, there's no way. But there is, he continued enthusiastically, dramatically beginning to write on the whiteboard he had brought in with him. It requires a great deal of chemistry knowledge, however, and has taken me about a year to research to get it to work, but I think it's finally ready. He rambled, not looking up from his writing. He finally capped the marker he was writing with and turned to face me. He had drawn a diagram on the whiteboard illustrating his project. I didn't understand any of it. Basically, atoms like to fuse with other atoms to make compounds. But what if we utilize this to get places? He continued. He was delusional. I was sure of it. For example, oxygen likes to fuse with oxygen to make O2. It's just the way it works. They need to share electrons to be stable, and they usually bind to the closest oxygen in proximity. Yeah, I know how it works. I took chem in high school, I said. But what are you getting at? He paused and said his next words in nearly a whisper. I figured out how to teleport, Maria, he said as he leaned in. His words were laced with almost a sense of childlike wonder, like a kindergartner who had found a cool rock and was showing it to his friends. How? I queried, my eyes widening with wonder. Had he really? What if, instead of atoms bonding with the ones close to them, that stabilize them, they bonded as we choose them to, with which ones we choose them to? He began to point to the pictures in the diagram he had drawn. Now, of course, they have to stabilize each other electron-wise. There's no controlling that. But I figured out a way to choose, for example, which oxygen bonds to which oxygen. I nodded. For this experiment, I used specifically water molecules, H2O, because the bonds they form aren't too hard to build and break, and they're quite abundant. I raised my hand timidly. My brother was 3 years younger than me, and it was kind of amusing that I was so confused by what he was saying. So, sorry, I know I'm kind of rambling and you look confused. To put it in the simplest way possible, I could take a hydrogen atom from my body and force it to bond with another hydrogen and oxygen anywhere in the world, causing me, by some occurrence I can't exactly explain, to be taken with it, forming an H2O at the secondary location. But it works, and that's all I need to know. Have you tried yet? I just told you it works. Of course I've tried it, he scoffed. Show me, I ushered. He sighed. If I must, skeptic, he said jokingly. I don't know how he did it, but almost instantaneously he appeared on the other side of the room. Ta-da! I was beyond shocked. I was bewildered. There's no way, I stuttered. There is, my dear sister, and I discovered it. So how do you get it to work? He paused. I don't know. I kind of just do it, he shrugged. I picture the atoms bonding, and it happens. Thoughts were racing through my head at 100 miles a minute. Do you realize how powerful this is? I asked hesitantly. He thought for a minute. No, I don't. Oh, holy crap. He looked at me in the eyes and then shouted excitedly, Holy crap! He smiled and jumped up and down with joy. He touched his head and made crazy hand gestures as he went on. I figured out how to control matter. I smiled. I was happy for him, but this whole thing was surreal. It wasn't right. All I wanted to do was teleport and... He paused, speechless from his own excitement. This is awesome, he squealed again. He blipped out of the room in a blink of an eye, and then I heard him yell from the other side of the house. I'm over here! Then the whiteboard disappeared. I followed his voice and I found him outside, once again, in awe. I watched him examine the whiteboard. As I looked closer at what he was analyzing, I noticed a chunk of stuff fused to the back of the whiteboard. What's going on? I asked. It looks like, because the chemical compounds are more difficult to build and break, it did it the easiest way, and this mass formed. Why? He thought harder before answering my question. It didn't just make a simple water. The molecules in it are more complex. I shrugged. It's curious. I'll have to research it more, he muttered before breaking into a smile again. The next day, I woke up to my alarm and walked out into the kitchen to get some water. Boo! Damien shouted from behind me. He wasn't there before. I see you're enjoying your discovery, I commented, playfully nudging him. Before I knew it, my nudge had caused him to lose his balance. He cried out in pain as he laid on the floor. Oh my God, are you okay? I'm so sorry. I frantically apologized and bent over to help him up. Only he didn't get up. He winced and then looked at me, tears in his eyes. "It hurts." Then I noticed his foot was stuck in the floor. That's what had caused him to lose his balance, and now the bone stuck out at a grotesque angle. "Maria, call 911 or something. It hurts. Oh my God." He moaned in pain. I hastily picked up my phone and dialed 911, and I sat next to my brother, clutching his hand until the emergency crew arrived. "What the?" The paramedic stopped short as he went to examine Damien's leg, upon noticing his foot had clipped into the floor like a video game glitch. "I'm stuck," he cried. The paramedic radioed in the fire department to try to get Damien out. "Can't you just, unbond them or something?" He gritted his teeth and shook his head. "No, I can only make bonds." He let out another scream of pain, beginning to hyperventilate. The paramedic turned back around to face us and clipped his radio back onto his belt. Damien didn't pass out until the EMT rolled up his pant leg, and he saw his bone. I even got nauseous looking at it, and I could feel his pain. How did this happen? The fire department arrived with saws and other tools, and chopped up the floor in order to get my brother out. His foot was still intact, but his leg was now broken because some molecule didn't form the right way, as he explained to me after he woke up in the hospital. "He'll have to be non-weight bearing for about 2 months, as that was a pretty nasty break," the doctor explained. "Say, how did you get stuck in a perfectly intact floor like that anyway?" he queried. My brother shrugged. He was discharged 3 days later, having a stay in the hospital for a few nights, due to the break needing surgery to repair. When our parents heard about it, they considered cutting their trip short, and my brother argued with them over the phone and insisted that he would be fine, so they didn't. Over the next few days, Damien was getting better. He wasn't as tired and grumpy, and he was in slightly less pain than before. I decided to bring breakfast into his room, and as I opened the door, the tray disappeared straight out of my hands and appeared in Damien's lap. "Damien!" He grinned. "You don't have to wait on me. I can do that all myself now." "But what about your accident? What if something else happens? The teleporting thing doesn't seem very stable." "You worry too much. I'll be fine," he said through a mouthful of the eggs I made. I left him to his own devices and decided to watch TV. I was hours into a rewatch of The Office when I heard Damien call my name. I followed his voice to the bathroom, and I found him standing on his crutches and looking in the mirror. "Maria," he mumbled. "Yes?" "Something's wrong," he said meekly, turning to face me. I looked at him in shock as I saw what had happened. Giant masses of stuff protruded from his head and body, like it had on the whiteboard. I could make out a PlayStation controller lodged between his eyes, and the chunk of a console and wires dangling out of his chest. There were no wounds either. It was terrifying. I just wanted to play some games, so I summoned my controller and his eyes started to fill with tears. "I don't know how to undo all this." "Oh my God. Do you want me to take you to the hospital?" I asked him, my entire body shaking with anxiety. I was looking at my brother, who was now a mangled mess of random matter, and I didn't know what to do. "No, they won't know how to fix it. I'm gonna try myself." He shut his eyes and concentrated hard, but nothing happened. In fact, it got worse. The masses grew bigger, and my brother began to fade away. He won't come out of the bathroom. Every time I go to check on him, it's worse. I tried talking to him, but he's just not there anymore. It's almost like the extra matter made him a zombie. I don't know what to do. My parents won't know what to do, and neither will the hospital. Even the kid who made the discovery, my genius brother, doesn't know how to reverse it. And the masses of matter just keep getting bigger. The bathroom door started to bow outwards, and soon it will break, and the masses will grow into the hallway and the rest of the house. I don't know how far it will go, All I know is that my brother is still in there, trying desperately to make it go away. But alas, it only gets bigger. I don't know how big it's going to get, and my brother won't listen to my pleading for him to stop. My girlfriend Emily and I have been together for a little over 3 years. She's the best thing that ever walked into my life. Very caring and supportive, and she makes some real good home-cooked meals. She always brings out the best in me, and I try to bring out the best in her. That's not to say that everything is perfect. We've had our ups and downs. The occasional argument bubbles to the surface now and then, but overall it's been a very happy relationship. It was about 3 months ago when things started to get strange. A heavenly smell wafted in from the kitchen. My girlfriend was making dinner for us, as she liked to do. Though we'd often cook together, she offered to cook alone. Smelled like she was making stir-fry, and as I closed the distance, I could hear the sizzle of vegetables in a hot pan. I came from behind and wrapped my arms around her. Leaning my head forward, I kissed her cheek. "You need any help out there?" I asked while pulling her close to me. "No thanks, I've got it covered," she said. I could see her smile, and she reached an arm up and touched my hair, and then, crack! A loud cracking sound echoed from her shoulder. It sounded like bone had broken into pieces. It was so loud, and it sounded like it would hurt. I instinctively let go of her, fearful that I may have somehow hurt her. "Holy crap! Are you all right, babe?" I asked. She turned away from the stove, still smiling at me. "What are you talking about?" "Your shoulder just cracked. It was so loud, it sounded like your bone shattered." "Well, I didn't feel or hear anything." "You sure it wasn't something else?" "Might have just been the veggies in the pan," she said while turning back to the stove to stir the vegetables. I couldn't really answer that. I swear I heard that crack come from her shoulder. It didn't sound like the sizzle of a pan or even a pop. But I let this incident go without making too much of a fuss. The next time it happened was a few nights later, when we were getting ready for bed. I had brushed my teeth and gotten into bed already. When my girlfriend came in and started to lift her leg to get into the bed, there was an ear-splitting snapping sound. My blood went cold, and I expected her to cry out in pain and clutch her leg. But instead, she just got into bed like nothing was wrong. "Babe, what is going on? Your leg just made a snapping noise. I don't understand. Doesn't that hurt?" I asked. She looked at me quizzically. "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't hear anything." "I heard it clear as day. Your leg just made a snapping noise." "Is this some kind of prank? I'm tired and I want to sleep." She was beginning to shift from confused to annoyed with my constant questions. I relented and leaned over and gave her a kiss. I flicked off the light and laid there in bed. I know I heard it. It sounded exactly like the time I had fallen while playing soccer and broke my leg. I fell the wrong way while running, and there was a loud snap while my concerned teammates gathered around me. The pain was excruciating. There was no way it could be ignored, and obviously, I could not walk for a while. The thought of that incident made me shudder, and I tried to push it all from my mind so that I could sleep. Incidents like this kept happening. She would move a certain way and something would pop or grind or crack. It was very worrisome, and I started to think that she may be hiding a disease from me, or something. Every time I mentioned it, she would become more annoyed. I felt like her personality had changed. The once calm and caring Emily I knew was now annoyed with me, but she showed no signs of pain from any of it. Still, one day I insisted she go to the doctor. "You have to go get yourself checked out. I think something is wrong. It's not normal for this stuff to be happening," I said. "We don't have money for that, and if we did, you should be getting yourself to a mental health specialist. You keep saying that my bones are popping or snapping, but I don't hear anything. This is becoming ridiculous. You are hearing things that aren't there." "No, no way. I hear it. It's so clear," I said. "Yeah? Lots of people hear weird things, but they aren't real. You are sick. You need to get help." I left the room, trying not trying to escalate the situation into an even worse argument. I thought she must be lying, but then stopped and thought to myself, what if she was right? But I didn't seem to hear sounds from other people, only from her. For a while, I kept quiet about the whole thing, until one night things got even worse. I awoke in the middle of the night to hear the sound of cracking and grinding. It was loud enough to wake me, and when I looked over at my girlfriend, I could see her arm was contorting and moving in odd ways that simply weren't possible without bones breaking. My heart beat fast as her arm thrashed around and terror set in. My heart beat fast as her arm thrashed around and terror set in. The sounds of bones snapping continued for what felt like minutes. I shakily said her name to see if she was awake, but her eyes were closed, and her arm kept on moving and cracking and grinding. It wouldn't stop. And then her arm reached for me, her fingers popping as they wrapped around my neck and began to squeeze. That was enough. I grabbed her arm and pushed it back towards her body. The cracking and grinding stopped as she opened her eyes, as I had my hands on her arm. She sat up in bed and pushed my hands off her arm. "What are you doing?" she asked with a scowl on her face. "Your damn arm was moving on its own. You tried to strangle me, and your bones, they kept cracking and breaking," I cried out. "God, not this again. This is getting so tiresome. Now you're waking me up in the middle of the night for this? Look." She moved her arm back and forth, twisted it. No cracking or grinding. "See? It's fine." She rolled onto her side, facing away from me. "I think we need to get you some help. Tomorrow we'll see if we can find a psychiatrist or someone to help you. You can't keep going on and on about this." I said nothing, still feeling terrified at the whole ordeal, but I was pretty convinced now that I may be imagining things. I laid in bed for a while, feeling confused, scared, and unsure. I couldn't get back to sleep. Later in the night, Emily got up to use the bathroom. I got out of bed feeling more awake than ever and went to sit in the living room. It was quiet for a moment, and then I heard that cracking and grinding noise emanating from the bathroom. I covered my ears and closed my eyes until the sound stopped. Emily came out of the bathroom, but something wasn't right. Her head was tilted ever so slightly to the left for some reason, and something protruded from her neck on the right side. It pressed against her skin, pushing it to its limits. I said nothing about it, though our eyes met briefly and she only scowled at me. I figured I must have been crazy. She got back into bed and went to sleep, while I spent the night sitting on the couch. The next day, I agreed to see a psychiatrist at Emily's request. Her neck was normal when I saw her in the morning. The protrusion was gone. That was enough to convince me that I was suffering from some form of mental illness, complete with auditory and visual hallucinations. The first meeting was expensive, but I figured I needed help. The doctor sat me down, and after some brief talk of my life, he asked me about my hallucinations. "Well, I only seem to have them when Emily is around. I hear these cracks like bones breaking, but they only come from her. The sounds are awful, but she says she's fine." The doctor only nodded and scribbled something down in a notebook. "Are there any others around when you hear these things? When you and Emily go out, do you hear them?" he asked. "Actually, no. If we are out, I never hear them. It's when we are all alone that it starts." "Strange," he said while eyeing his watch. "Listen, our time is up for today, but I'd like to discuss this more in a week. I'd like you to log the times and instances when you start hearing and seeing things. There may be very specific triggers, and if we can discover those and eliminate them, we might be able to avoid putting you on medicine." I thanked him for his time and scheduled an appointment for next week with his secretary. I can't say it was all that helpful. He didn't really tell me what was going on either, but I figured I would follow his suggestion. The matter of whether I was crazy or not still seemed up in the air. After the appointment, I sat in my car, not really wanting to go home to Emily. Lately, it felt like walking on eggshells. Her mood was dour, and she constantly bossed me around. I was feeling exhausted with everything. The sounds of bones cracking and her trying to strangle me was scary, even if it wasn't real. I stopped by the store to pick up a notebook to document everything as the doctor ordered, but then an idea popped into my head. I figured there was only one way to prove or disprove my sanity. I went to the store and bought a tape recorder. If I could catch the sounds on tape, then I would know for certain that I wasn't hearing things. When I walked in the door, I had the recorder going already. Emily greeted me with a hug and a smile, which was a nice change of pace from her typical moodiness. "I'm glad you went. How did it go? Did he get you on any meds yet?" she asked eagerly. "No, not yet. He wants to have a follow-up appointment. I think he finds it strange that my symptoms only happen at home, and only around you," I said with hopes of her not being offended. "Isn't he supposed to be the expert? Why is that strange?" she said while her smile fell into a scowl. There was a brief moment of silence, and then crack. A loud crack rang through the room. It sounded like her back just broke, but she didn't even move. I felt my hands begin to clam up. My heartbeat increased. She had no reaction to it as usual. "Your back, it just..." Her mouth contorted into a sneering grin as she looked at me. "My back what? It cracked?" "Yeah, it was so loud," I said, feeling a sinking feeling in my stomach. "I didn't hear anything," she said while maintaining that wicked grin. I reached for my back pocket and pulled out the recorder. Stopping it, I rewound the tape and started to play back the events from when I walked in the door. I was sweating, knowing that this was the moment. Emily's face twisted into anger. "What the hell is that?" she demanded. I pressed play, and it began to play back the events since I walked in the door. Emily was trying to paw it from my hand, but I moved back and listened closely as she shrieked at me to turn it off. "Why is that strange?" The tiny voice of Emily spilled from the recorder. There was a moment of silence. I felt more nervous as time passed slowly. Finally, there was a loud, audible crack that played. The sound rang through the room. There was no denying it anymore. Something was wrong with Emily, not me. She knew she had been discovered, and as I looked into her eyes, I saw them change. Her eyes grew dull as she began to bend backwards, her back snapping again loudly until her upper body was parallel to the floor. Her neck twisted violently again and again until blood began to spurt out of her neck. Her arms began to move in unnatural arcs as the sound of bones snapping and grinding filled the room. Her body contorted into a bridge pose. I tried to back away as the blood poured from her twisted neck, but she was so fast. She leapt at me, knocking me to the ground. She put her hand on my shoulder for a moment before the skin between her wrist and hand split as a sharp bone shot out and stabbed me. I cried out in pain as my blood began to trickle down my arm, but adrenaline pumped through me. Using my legs, I kicked her away. The sounds of bones cracking filled the room as she flew back against a wall. Pulling myself to my feet, I flew from the building, with a splintered bone protruding from my shoulder. The grinding and snapping noises grew fainter as I escaped. I clutched my shoulder as I made my way down the sidewalk, trying to get further away from her, or whatever that thing was. The blood flowed from my shoulder, and I reached into my pocket and called 911 before I lost consciousness. When paramedics arrived, I vaguely remember them taking me in the ambulance. The doctors whispered in hushed tones as to why part of a radius bone was sticking out of my shoulder, but they took care of me nonetheless. The whole thing left me terrified. Any snapping or crack from anything had me jumping, and I had to deal with the loss of Emily. I'm not sure if she was always that thing, or if Emily had somehow been taken over, but I knew that she was gone now, and it left me feeling empty. When I thought no one would hear me, I spilled a few tears, but I guess I was not as quiet as I could have been. A nurse walked into the room as I scrambled to try and hide my tears, but it was obvious I was crying. "Don't worry, dear. You'll be out of here soon. There's no need to cry," she said. The nurse went and pulled a tissue from a tissue box, and as she handed it to me, there was a loud crack that rang throughout the room. It sounded like her arm had broken. My eyes widened, and she looked at me with a sinister grin. Thank you for making it this far. I hope you enjoyed the video. I just wanted to quickly let you know about a couple things I have going on. I have an Instagram where I post more personal things about who I am. It isn't just all creepy stuff. You can find me at Stories After Midnight. I also have a Twitter where I mainly retweet and like things I find interesting. The handle for that is in the description, but it is S_A_midnight. I should really find another one because that's hard to say. If you really like what I'm doing, consider joining the Midnighters. That's my growing community where we hang out and have fun and talk about cats. You can find a link to our Discord in the description below. We'd love to see you there. Other than that, it'd make me happier than a cat on a table full of antique glassware if you'd like the video and consider sticking around for more. We'll see you in the next one.